She flinched before he touched her. A sharp breath, a warning torn from pain. "Don't. It still hurts there." Thomas Hale stopped where he stood. His boots sank into the grass, but he did not move closer. He did not reach out. He let the moment hang heavy and true, because he understood that whatever had happened to her had taught her to fear hands more than silence. The words had not been anger. They were survival. And once spoken, they could not be taken back. He saw her then, really saw her. A body built for endurance, forced flat against the earth. She lay face down, taller than most men he knew, her frame wide and powerful even now. Both ankles were bound to rough wooden stakes driven deep into the ground. Rope cut into dark skin, pulled tight enough to make the flesh swell around it. Her shoulders shook with each breath she tried to keep quiet. On her thigh, blood had dried. Into the dust, a dark stain pressed into crushed grass. Thomas took one step back and set his knife on the ground. Handle turned toward her. Then he turned his body away. The wind whispered through the rope, dry and thin. A warning sound. He stood still, back to her, eyes on the empty line where the desert met the sky. He did not need an explanation. This was not accident or misfortune. This was done carefully, on purpose. Behind him, he heard the scrape of metal, then nothing. Long seconds passed. He stayed where he was. He placed his water flask on the ground, then a clean cloth folded square. After that, he stepped farther away, leaving space she could claim or refuse. The knife rang softly as it hit stone. She had taken it. Each cut came slow. Deliberate rope fibers snapped one by one. When the last stake came loose, her body folded. Into the dirt, not weak, just released. The sound of water followed. First rough gulps, then slower, then quiet. Not a threatening quiet. A closed door after a storm. A faint cough. Controlled, Thomas turned. She sat with her back against dry grass. Spine straight, chin lifted. The cloth was wrapped tight around her thigh. Pain still lived in her face, but her eyes were no longer wild. They watched him, sharp and steady. A warrior's eyes, ones that had not forgotten who they belonged to. He nodded once, without speaking. Thomas led his horse closer and loosened the reins. He did not touch her. He shifted his stance, offering room if she chose to rise. She tested her legs, one knee dipped. Thomas lifted his arm halfway and waited. She took it, a firm grip. No clutching. No plea. Her weight was solid, her movements careful and proud. Step by step, he helped her onto the horse. When she was settled, he handed her the reins first. A simple thing, a choice returned. They did not look back as they left the place where the stakes still stood. The ranch lay behind a low ridge of rock where the wind lost its bite. The old house smelled of smoke and sun-warmed wood. Time moved slower there, as if it knew better than to rush people who carried too much already. She sat on the front step, legs stretched out, back against a post. Her sighs filled the space without apology. Thomas set a bowl of water beside her and stepped away. The first days passed in small sounds. Firewood crackling, horses shifting in the corral, wind easing through gaps in the door. Slept sitting up, back to the wall, as if the ground itself could turn on her if she lay down. On the third day, when the sun softened, she spoke. The one who did this, she said, voice low and steady, was my husband. No names, no detail. Just truth set down like a stone. He was respected. Spoke of order, of what a wife owed. He said strength in a woman had to be corrected. The stakes were not rage. They were instruction, reminder of ownership supported by quiet rules. Thomas added wood to the fire, kept it steady. He did not interrupt. She had endured because isolation was worse than pain. But when her face was pressed into the dirt and the rope tightened, she understood what staying would cost. Not freedom. Herself. She ran before dawn with wounds and a decision that would not bend. Thomas looked at her and saw no victim. Only a woman who had chosen to stand. On the 5th morning, the wind changed. The horses went still. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the land, far enough to be polite, close enough to warn. They spoke of order, of returning what belonged. Said it was not a lone rancher's place to interfere. She stood behind Thomas, tall and unbowed. When a second voice hinted at consequences, the air grew heavy. Not with violence, with pressure. "She's injured," Thomas said. "She's not moving." They told him they were not asking. Then they left, dust hanging where words should have been. That afternoon, she asked one question. What if they come back? Thomas watched the fresh tracks cut through the dirt. "I won't hand you over," he said. "That's all I can promise." Night fell hard. He wrote a letter by lamplight, words slow and few, to a man who once owed him his life. Outside, a lone wolf called thin and long. Thomas saddled his horse. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he rode into the dark. She stayed by. The fire, waiting not to be saved. To see if her choice would be honored. Dawn came without promise, just light creeping over the ridge. She woke before the sun cleared the rocks. Sitting where she had slept, back straight, hands resting on her knees. The fire had burned down to embers. The house was quiet in the way. Places get when someone important is gone. She listened for hoofbeats. There were none. Only wind brushing the walls, testing them, then moving on. She stood slowly and stepped outside. The desert stretched wide and open, unchanged by what had happened inside it. She drew water from the well, her movements careful but sure. Pain still lived in her leg, a dull throb she accepted without flinching. Pain had never been the thing that broke her. It was the taking, the deciding. The ropes. She worked because stillness invited memory. By mid-morning, the horses shifted in the corral, restless. She noticed the way their ears tilted toward the horizon. The way animals always knew before people did. She rested her hand on the fence rail, feeling the sun warm the wood. She did not tell herself stories. She waited. Thomas returned just before noon. She heard him before she saw him. Leather creaking hooves, slowing. He rode in without urgency, but his shoulders sat heavier than when he left. He dismounted and tied the horse, then stood for a moment, hat still on, as if grounding himself before crossing some invisible line. She did not rush him. "The letter was delivered," he said at last. No relief followed the words, no comfort. He read it. Thomas nodded. He remembered the winter. He didn't say much, but he'll come. That was all. No timeline, no promise of safety. Just the truth placed where it could be seen. She let the breath leave her slowly. Not fear. Preparation. That afternoon, they worked side by side without speaking. She mended a tear in the saddle strap with practiced hands. Thomas fixed a loose hinge on the door. Their movements found a rhythm that did not intrude or claim. Space remained between them. Chosen space. Respected space. When night fell, Thomas cooked beans and set a plate across from her. They ate in quiet. The fire popped once, sharp and brief. Later, she spoke again. Not of pain, of warning. "They will not come angry," she said. "They will come calm. That is when they are most certain." Thomas nodded. He had seen that kind of certainty before. It wore many faces: lawmen, ranch owners, men who believed. Rules excused what hands did. Sleep came lighter that night. She lay down this time, flat on her back, staring at the ceiling until the wind lulled her eyes shut. It was the first time she had trusted the ground beneath her in many days. The rider arrived 2 mornings later. He came alone. An older man with a weathered face and eyes that carried more winters than words. He dismounted slowly and did not reach for anything. Thomas stepped onto the porch. She stood behind him, visible. "I came because I was asked," the man said. His voice was rough, but not unkind. They sat at the table. The fire was low. The air held its breath. The man listened, not just to Thomas. To her, she did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She spoke plainly, of ropes, of rules, of what was taken without asking. She did not ask for protection, only recognition. When she finished, the man looked into the fire. "For a long time, you understand what refusing means," he said. "Yes, it will shame him. Yes, and you will be alone." She met his gaze. "I have been alone." Silence followed. Heavy, necessary. At last, the man stood. "I cannot change everything," he said, "but I will not pretend I did not hear you." That was all he offered. Then he left. The wind shifted again that evening. Not sharp, steady. Thomas did not celebrate. He did not reassure. He understood something had moved, but nothing had settled. They ate together, then sat by the fire as night pressed close. "I won't tell you what to do," he said finally. "If you want to go, I'll help you. If you stay, it will be because you choose to." She looked at the flames, watched them bend and rise. "I am tired of running," she said, "but I am not tired of choosing." That night, she slept without waking. The next day, hoofbeats returned. More this time. Not at the edge. Closer. Thomas stepped out first. She followed, not hiding behind him, not pushing ahead. The men dismounted, faces calm, voices measured. They spoke of resolution, of restoring balance, of how things could still be handled quietly. She listened. Every word when they finished, she stepped forward. "I will not return," she said. No anger, no tremor. One man shifted his weight. "You don't decide this alone. I do," she said. "I already did." The space tightened, not violent, expectant. Thomas felt it then. The moment before, something breaks. He did not move, did not speak. Dust rose in the distance. Another rider. Fast the men turned as the horse came hard. Across the ground, it slowed only when it reached them. The rider dismounted, coat dusty, badge dull in the sun. He did not shout. He simply stood. "She's spoken," he said. "That matters here." No one argued. Not because they agreed, 'cause the ground beneath the moment had shifted. The men mounted and rode away, leaving silence behind them. She stood still long after they were gone. When she finally moved, it was not toward Thomas. It was toward the open land, beyond the ranch. She looked out across it, wide and unforgiving, and breathed. Something had held. For now, but neither of them believed it was finished. The days that followed did not rush. They settled in, cautious and watchful. She woke each morning before the sun and walked the fence line, testing posts, feeling the land beneath her boots. Her leg healed slowly. The swelling eased, but the memory of rope still lived in her muscles. Thomas never commented on her pace or her work. He watched from a distance, not guarding her, just present, at the well. She washed her hands and paused longer than needed, letting the cool water run. Simple things mattered now. Choice mattered. Even how long to stand in the shade. One afternoon, Thomas found her in the barn, lifting feed sacks that were still too heavy for her leg. He said nothing at first, just took one sack from her hands and set it aside. "You don't have to prove anything here," he said. She met his eyes. "I'm not," she replied. "I'm remembering." He nodded. That made sense to him. At night, They sat by the fire with more ease than before. Silence no longer felt like a test. It rested between them, steady. Sometimes she spoke of the land she came from, not names, just hills shaped like shoulders, water that ran thin but honest. She never spoke his name. Thomas never asked. The wind carried news before people did. On the fourth evening after the riders left, smoke appeared on the far horizon, too steady to be accident. Thomas saw it first. He stood longer than usual on the porch, eyes narrowed. She joined him. "They're talking," she said. "Yes. Not about peace. No." That night, Thomas sharpened his tools, not his rifle. The sound of metal on stone filled the house. It was not preparation for violence. It was habit. Something to do with his hands while his mind weighed things that could not be fixed by force. She watched from the doorway. "If it comes to it," Say said, "I will not hide behind you." "I wouldn't let you," he replied. That answer surprised her. She nodded once. 2 mornings later, a boy rode in, fast and unannounced. He stopped at the gate, breathing hard, eyes wide. He did not dismount. "They're meeting in Cameron," he said. "Your name's being said." Thomas thanked him and sent him on. Cameron sat half a day's ride away. A town that liked rules when they were convenient and silence when they were not. Thomas had not been there in months. He knew what waited in places like that. Opinions dressed as order. Judgment disguised as concern. She did not ask if he would go. She knew he would. They rode together. The road stretched long and pale under the sun. Thomas rode half a length ahead, not leading, just keeping pace he had learned from years alone. She followed, steady, her posture strong despite the ache that still lived in her leg. Neither spoke. When Cameron came into view, the noise reached them first. Voices, hooves, a restlessness that clung to the air. The main street was crowded. People gathered not to help, but to watch. They dismounted at the edge. The man stood near the center, well kept, calm, speaking in even tones about honor and disruption, about how order had been broken and needed restoring. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Thomas stayed where he was. Then she stepped forward. The crowd shifted. Some recognized her. Others only saw her size, her scars, her refusal to bow. She walked slowly, each step deliberate. The faint marks on her ankles were still visible. She did not hide them. The man turned, surprised only for a moment. His smile returned quickly. "There you are," he said, as if she had been lost property. "We can end this quietly." She stopped a few steps away, looked at him without heat. "I am not coming back," she said. A murmur ran through the crowd. He tilted his head. "You're confused. You've been influenced." She shook her head once, small, certain. "I am clear." Thomas watched, hands loose at his sides. This was not his moment. The man's voice tightened. "You shame me. I will not carry that any more." Silence spread. The kind that presses on the ears. She stepped sideways and stood beside Thomas, not touching him, just choosing where to stand. The crowd breathed in. The man looked at Thomas then. Anger flickered, not because he was threatened. Because he was being denied. Before he could speak again, a rider pushed through. The marshal dismounted, dust on his coat, eyes tired but sharp. He took in the scene without hurry. "She's spoken," he said. "That holds weight." The man protested. The crowd did not support him, not openly. But they did not stand with him either. The marshal looked at her. "Is this your choice?" "Yes," he nodded. "Then it stands." The man said nothing more. He turned away, his calm finally cracked by something close to disbelief. They left Cameron as the sun dipped west. No cheers followed them. Only the sound of their steps on dirt and a space opened that could not be closed again. On the ride back, the land felt wider. Not kinder, but honest. When the ranch came into view, she slowed. Stopped at the fence. Looked out across the open ground. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Thomas dismounted beside her. "Neither do I." She breathed in deep. Not relief, readiness. Behind them, the wind rose again, steady and persistent, carrying with it the sense that choosing had consequences, and some of them had not yet arrived. The ranch did not change after Cameron, but they did. Mornings came quieter, not because danger had passed, but because both of them listened harder. Thomas noticed it in small things. How she checked the horizon before drawing water. How she stood, with her shoulders open now, no longer folded inward, yet never careless. Choice had given her strength, but not illusion. She began sleeping through the night, not every night, but often enough that it mattered. One afternoon, Thomas found her, sitting on the ridge behind the house, facing the long stretch of desert beyond. She had her knees pulled up, arms resting loose, eyes steady. He did not ask what she was thinking. He sat a short distance away and let the wind speak for them. "They will not forget." "No," he agreed. "But they will." Wait. Yes, waiting was something Thomas understood. It had shaped most of his life. Crops, seasons, loss. He knew the danger in thinking waiting meant weakness. Sometimes it meant choosing the right moment. That evening, she brought up the idea herself. "I do not want to live hidden," she said. "But I also do not want others to be harmed because of me." Thomas stirred the fire. "Then we prepare." Quietly. They began making changes that did not announce themselves. Fence lines reinforced. Tools moved closer to hand. Extra water stored, not for a fight, for endurance. The kind that lasted longer than anger. Days turned warm again. Her leg healed, enough that she walked without favoring it. The scars remained. She did not cover them. When Thomas noticed men in town glance at her ankles during supply runs, he saw something shift. Not acceptance, awareness. She did not lower her eyes. One morning, a woman from town approached her at the well, spoke softly. Not in apology, in curiosity. Asked if it was true she had refused to return. "Yes," she said. The woman nodded slowly, said nothing more, but she did not look away. That mattered. The pressure came not as force, but as suggestion. Whisper's comments passed as concern. How things might go easier if she softened her stance. She let the past be past. She listened. Then she continued as she was. Thomas watched her handle it with a patience that impressed him more than defiance ever could. She did not argue. She did not justify. She simply existed without apology. One evening, thunder rolled far off. A dry storm. No rain. Just sound and flash. They sat inside, the house lit by fire and brief bursts of white through the windows. She spoke without looking at him. "I was taught that love was obedience." Thomas did not interrupt, and that pain meant I was being shaped into something better. The fire cracked. He added wood. "I believed it for a long time," she said, "because believing it was easier than seeing what it truly was." "What do you see now?" he asked. She turned then, met his eyes. "That love does not ask you to disappear." The thunder faded. The house settled. The visit came 2 weeks later. Not riders. One man, her former husband. He arrived near dusk, alone, horse-lathered, face calm in a way Thomas did not trust. He stopped at the gate and waited. Did not call out. Did not enter. She saw him first. Her body went still, not frozen. Focused, Thomas stood beside her. "You don't have to speak to him. I know," she said. Then she stepped forward. They met at the fence. He spoke as if continuing an old conversation. Said he had been humiliated. Said she had embarrassed him before people who mattered. Said order had been disturbed and needed restoring. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she placed both hands on the fence rail. Leaned forward slightly, not in weakness, but grounding herself. "I am not returning," she said. "Not now, not ever." His jaw tightened. "You belong with me." She shook her head. "I belong to myself." The words landed heavy. Final, for the first time, his calm fractured. "You think this ends well for you? I think it ends honestly." He looked past her then, at Thomas. Not as a rival. As an obstacle? Thomas did not move. "You've filled her head," the man said. "No," she replied, before Thomas could speak. "He gave me space. That is all." That answer angered him more than accusation would have. He mounted without another word, rode off into the dark. That night she did not sleep. Neither did Thomas. They sat at the table, the lamp burning low. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, restless. Thomas knew what had changed. The line had been crossed openly now. There would be consequences. Not dramatic, persistent. "You should leave," she said quietly. He shook his head once. "I do. They win without ever having to show their hand." She studied him. "And if staying costs you everything?" Thomas leaned back, looked at the ceiling. "Some things are already gone." Silence stretched. Not empty. Decided. When dawn came, it found them still there, seated across from one another. Both knowing the shape of what was coming had sharpened. And there would be no returning to the life either of them had lived before. The weeks after his visit did not explode. They pressed in. No threats were spoken aloud. No riders came in the night. Instead, small things shifted. A supplier delayed an order without explanation. A neighbor stopped returning greetings. In town. Conversations paused when she entered, then resumed in lower tones once she passed. Pressure without fingerprints. Thomas felt it too. A gate left unlatched. A tool gone missing. Then returned days later, as if to say, "We can reach you." He fixed what was broken and replaced what was taken. He did not comment. She noticed everything. "They want us tired," she said one evening as they stacked wood. "So we choose quiet over truth." Thomas wiped his hands on his trousers. "That only works if we're afraid of being alone." She gave a small nod. She had learned that lesson the hard way. The land itself seemed to test them. Heat lingered longer than usual. Water levels dropped. The well groaned when the bucket came up. Endurance was no longer a metaphor. It was daily work. One afternoon, a rider from Cameron arrived with a folded notice. He handed it to Thomas without meeting his eyes. A dispute over grazing rights. Old lines suddenly questioned. A hearing set. Rules being used like tools. Dull, but heavy. "They're closing in," she said, after reading it. Double quotes, "yes. And if they win?" Thomas looked out over the pasture. "Then I lose land. Not my word." She considered that. "They are counting on you choosing land." Thomas met her gaze. They misjudged. That night she sat alone by the fire long after Thomas had gone to bed. The flames reflected in her eyes. When she finally stood, her decision had settled. The hearing took place in Cameron. The room was crowded. Men filled the benches. A few women stood at the back. Thomas sat straight, hands folded, hat on his knee. She sat beside him, present but not invited to speak. Arguments were made calmly. Boundaries cited. Tradition leaned on like a cane. When Thomas was asked to respond, he did not argue lines on a map. He spoke of use, of care, of years worked without conflict. His voice was steady, but the outcome had already been shaped elsewhere. The ruling came down as expected. The land would be reduced. Outside, dust swirled as people dispersed. No one looked at her directly. It was easier that way. Thomas mounted his horse slowly. She stood beside him, watching Cameron settle back into its familiar shape. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "I knew the cost." They rode home in silence. That evening, she began packing her few belongings. Thomas found her folding the cloth he had given her that first day. He leaned against the doorframe, understanding before she spoke. "I won't let them bleed you dry because of me," she said. "If I leave, the pressure eases. And what happens to you?" She held his gaze. "I survive. I always have." Thomas stepped forward. "Not close. Just enough." "This is your choice," he said carefully. "I won't argue it. But don't mistake sacrifice for freedom." She paused. The words struck deeper than protest would have. "I don't know the difference yet," she admitted. They sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. The desert stretched wide, unchanged, indifferent. She thought of roads leading away, of starting again where no one knew her name, but also of what it meant to leave something unfinished. That night, she slept poorly. Dreams tangled with memory. Rope, firelight, silence. Before dawn, she rose and stepped outside. Thomas was already there, seated on the fence rail, staring east. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." They watched the sky lighten. "I thought leaving would feel like choosing myself," she said. "But it feels like disappearing again." Thomas nodded. "Freedom isn't always about distance." She turned to him. "If I stay, they won't stop." "No? And you're willing to lose more?" "Yes." She studied his face. The lines carved by years of restraint, not regret. A man who understood loss but did not worship it. "I don't want you to stand for me," she said. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm standing with you. There's a difference." The sun broke over the ridge. She took a breath. A deep one. The kind that commits. "Then I stay," she said. "Not because I owe you, but because I refuse to be moved again." Thomas did not smile. He simply nodded. They went back inside and began unstacking what she had packed. By mid-morning, a rider approached. Fast, purposeful. Thomas stepped onto the porch as the horse skidded to a stop. The man did not dismount. "There's talk," he said. "Not just here. Others are watching now. What happens next won't stay small." Thomas glanced back at her. She stood in the doorway, shoulders squared. "Good," she said. "Let them watch." The rider hesitated, then nodded once and turned away. As the dust settled, Thomas felt it clearly for the first time. The pressure had not vanished. It had shifted. What had begun as quiet punishment was becoming something harder to contain, and when that happens, truth has a way of forcing itself into the open. The watching did not turn loud. It turned steady. People came by the ranch more often now, some with reasons, some without. A broken harness needing repair. A question about water rights. A woman from town bringing bread and leaving without saying. Why? No one spoke openly of sides, but choices showed in small movements. Who stopped? Who didn't? She noticed all of it. So did Thomas. One afternoon, a group gathered at the edge of the property. Not threatening, not friendly. Men who had lived by rules long enough to believe rules were the same as truth. They did not cross the fence. They waited. Thomas walked out to meet them. She followed and stopped a few steps behind him, visible. UNHIDDEN. The man who spoke was older, his voice worn thin by certainty. He said this situation had grown larger than anyone intended. Said traditions existed for a reason. Said order was fragile. She stepped forward before Thomas could respond. Order that survives by breaking people is already broken, she said. No anger, no challenge. Just fact. A murmur moved through the men. Not agreement. Recognition, one of. Them asked her plainly what she wanted. She did not answer right away. She looked at the land, at the fence, at the house that had given her space without demand. I want to live where my no is heard, she said. That is all. The men stood with that. Then they left, slowly, without resolution. That night, Thomas sat alone at the table long after she had gone to bed. He thought of land lost, of years pared down by one quiet decision after another. He did not regret the choice, but he knew something else was coming. When pressure fails, power tries. A different shape, it came at dawn. Hoofbeats, many this time. Not rushing. Certain she was already awake. She dressed calmly, wrapped her braid tight. When she stepped outside, Thomas was there, coat on, hat settled. No words passed between them. They walked to the fence together. Her former husband rode. At the front, not alone now. Men flanked him, not warriors, witnesses. He dismounted and approached, stopping a respectful distance away. This has gone far enough, he said. You've been given time. She met his gaze. I was never. Asking, he turned to Thomas. You have involved yourself in something that was not yours, Thomas answered evenly. She made it mine when she chose to stand here. The man's jaw tightened. Last chance, he said, looking back at her. Come home. End this quietly. She shook her head, slowly, clearly. I already ended it, she said. You just refused to accept it. For a moment, no one moved. Wind slid through the grass. A horse stamped. Then another rider approached from behind the group. The marshal. He dismounted and stood beside Thomas, not in front of him. I've heard enough, he said. This ends today. Voices rose, arguments flared. Not fists, words. Sharpened by fear of losing control. The marshal raised his hand once. She has chosen, he said, and that choice stands. Any attempt to force her back will be treated as assault. That's the law here. The word law landed heavier than anger ever could. Her former husband looked around. Searched faces, found no support. Not open. Not enough. His power had depended on silence. And silence was gone. He mounted without another word. The others followed. Dust rose. Then settled. She stood very still. Only when the last rider disappeared did she let out the breath she had been holding. Not a sob, not relief. Something quieter. Release Thomas did not touch her. He simply stood close. They walked back to the house together. Life did not become easy after that. It became honest. The land remained smaller. Work remained hard. But the pressure eased. People spoke more plainly now. Some avoided her. Others did not. Children waved. Women met her eyes. She slept deeply most nights. One evening, months later, they sat on the porch watching the sun lower itself into the desert. The wind moved gently, no longer forcing anything to bow. I never said thank you, she said. Thomas shook his head. You don't owe me that. She smiled slightly. I know. They did not build a life with vows or promises. They built it with repetition, staying, choosing, not binding one another with fear or need. The past did not vanish. Some nights, it returned in dreams, but when it did, she woke to quiet, to space, to the knowledge that her body belonged to her alone. Thomas aged a little faster after that. Or maybe he had simply stopped pretending otherwise. She stayed, not because she was held, because she chose to remain, side by side. They learned something the desert had always known, that strength is not about control, that love does not demand. Surrender, that when you give someone the freedom to say no and the safety to mean it, you give them the rarest thing of all, a life that is truly their own. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Best Wild West Tales, where every story rides through dust, danger, and a love that never fades. See you in the next tale, partner.